In 1997, Tata Motors completed its three-pronged trident strategy of See Su Sa with the launch of the Tata Safari. The Sumo was a strong people mover, but the real sales king was the Kijang, the Toyota Qualis. 5 years and 550 crores later, Mahindra replied with this. The Scorpio was the first indigenous new product development for Mahindra and took the market by storm. It had its interior packaged by Lear and engineering consultants was Hotel Whiting from UK. It had a strong marketing push and had many firsts, including the first voice assistant we saw in a car. Some of you may even remember this print ad, which came with a musical greeting card type voice note, which was pure marketing genius for that time. Over the 2 decades, it has dominated the market and the minds of the people and has literally become a common noun, a household name. The proof of its success is its over the years consistent, strong sales figures, which has recently skyrocketed ever since the launch of its latest avatar. Mahindra took everything that was right in the Scorpio, raised it exponentially to the power of N, and gave us the best ever Scorpio till date, the Scorpio-N. But to truly understand why I think that this car deserves our respect, we need to wind the clock a little back. Not so long ago, Mahindra got a Sangyong to Indian shores. They called it the Alturas G4, and I had even written a piece about it in 2019. This price matrix from that piece shows how its ambitious pricing, too close to the likes of the Toyota Fortuner, was a big reason for its failure. The market then was simply not ready for a 25 plus lakh Mahindra. But I, for one, always believed and declared that the Alturas was a highly underrated car, which lost out because of badge, price, and positioning. In my personal opinion, the Scorpio N is Mahindra's way of regaining that lost opportunity, a ladder frame seat at the D segment high table, if you will. I feel that the Scorpio N borrows a lot of design cues, exterior and interior, and the overall packaging seems well inspired from the learnings of Mahindra during its time with Sangyong, which is definitely a good thing for us. Even though the N is a completely new, from the scratch built vehicle, the Altura spirit is infused in it. Comment and let me know if you agree with me. Speaking of spirits, the Scorpio was originally intended to take on the people movers Sumo and Qualis, but because of the maturity and capability it showed as a well rounded family SUV, it soon found its natural rival in the Tata Safari. Right from its launch in 2002, at an unbelievable price of 5.49 lakhs ex showroom, the Scorpio has always maintained itself as a strong value proposition, always undercutting the Safari in price and outselling it in numbers. With the last of the true ladder frame Safaris gone with a storm, this jungle has only one king left, the Scorpio N. Let's see how Mahindra has positioned the Scorpio N. The car market is usually organized in these orbits, which we call as segments. Generally, the cost goes up with complexity as you jump from one orbit to another. In an ideal world, this would follow this straight line as you jump from one orbit to another. So you pay proportionally more money for a proportionally better car. But that never happens. So it's more of a curve. Some cars are overpriced and would stay above this line, and some are value for money and would stay below this line. Cars like the Scorpio Classic, for example, sit bang on the C segment orbit, while the pricey Toyota Fortuner would sit well above this line on the D2 orbit. Now, Mahindra wants to position the Scorpio N as a D segment contender at a value proposition well below this line in the D segment orbit. That's the exact consistent positioning they're targeting even in international markets like Australia, South Africa, where the N offers a budget friendly package compared to Fortuner, Everest, Isuzu Pajero, etc. This is how the N stacks up in the pricing matrix in the Indian market today. On a side note, that 12.5 lakh line is interesting because 50% of all cars that are sold in our country are above 12.5 lakhs. That's a very good counterintuitive insight, which can be a video of its own about aspirations and affordability that we're seeing today. With the market having majorly shifted towards monocoque crossovers, these are the last standing ladder frames you get to choose from if you're looking for a robust body on frame vehicle. But what's the reason for this robustness? And why does dynamics take a hit? Why are monocoques gifted with better road manners than ladder frames? As the name suggests, there is a frame and a separate body is bolted on it. So it's called a body on frame. The frame happens to look like a ladder, so they are also called ladder frames. The monocoque, on the other hand, is a single monolith which is made as a single whole piece structure. If you bend under a monocoque and see, you will not see the chassis separately. Now, my simplest hack for you to never forget body on frame for life is this RRR imagery, a body sitting on a separate frame. And in contrast, the monocoque is a single body, so let's take one Michael Jordan for that. Now imagine a dynamic game of basketball between these two. The ladder frame may be robust enough to take bullet shots, but will never be as quick off the line or as agile around turns as our monocoque Jordan. Advantage of body on frame for car makers is that once you have perfected a frame, you can base it as a platform to bolt on different bodies and build out completely new vehicles. You can improve the frame and bolt on the same body modified to suit the new frame as well. It gives complete engineering and design flexibility with cost savings compared to building each new car ground up. The closest example is the Scorpio-N, which is based on the third gen M Glide platform. Mahindra changes the wheelbase, improves the frame to the fourth gen M Glide platform, and bolts the roxx body on it to make it the Thar roxx. Now, you could bolt the pickup version of the Scorpio-N's body on the roxx's platform. You will get the global pickup. Since the frame is like a solid backbone to the entire vehicle, most of the load will be borne by this strong frame. Since it's a solid ladder truss like structure, it's also very good at resisting torsion and bending loads we would expect in heavy duty or off road conditions. And since the frame is doing all the dirty work, which leaves us to make the body lighter if we want, which will help in weight savings and improve dynamics. That's exactly what Mahindra have done with this Scorpio-N. They made the lightest body in white in the segment at 293 kilos. And what is more interesting is they have made an even lighter frame at just 213 kilos. They have managed to do this by reducing weight but increasing stiffness and strength, as explained in detail in our previous roxx video. In that video, we also explained how crashworthiness requires not a rigid structure that would never crush, but a controlled crushing instead, which absorbs the force and doesn't pass it on to the occupants. By using a combination of three different strength steels, Mahindra has managed to set the front end, the bonnet end of the vehicle as a crumple zone, but it will transfer all the force neatly across the body. But when it reaches the door frame, a very high strength steel has been used, which will ensure that it is rigid, so that even after the crash, the door frame is rigid and the door can be opened and the people come out. But remember what I said about the frame doing most of the dirty work? That's true here too, because about 72% of the force of impact is going to be absorbed by the frame, only 28% is going to the body. Notice that gap right ahead in the front. That part of the frame will crush, take the impact, and deform. And whatever residual force is left, it will transfer the force downstream along the arrows as the car bounces back from the impact. An interesting engineering design choice that Mahindra has made is to make each side of the frame independently strong enough to withstand a frontal impact, say near the headlight on one side, not letting it completely transfer to the other side by using partially effective crosslinks. What this means is that the brunt of such an impact will be taken by that side of the frame only, which is counterintuitive to me because we would assume that logically we should spread the impact force over a larger area over the entire frame. An interesting school of thought. The vehicle is sprung up on two sets of wheels. If we add weight somewhere in the middle, say passengers gotten, then there's nothing directly below to resist that weight. So the frame will bend locally. This is bending. If this weight is unevenly distributed diagonally, like in a cross axle situation with opposing wheels going up and down, then that is going to twist the frame. That is torsion. How well the frame resists bending and torsion, respectively, is called bending stiffness and torsion stiffness. Mahindra says that they have cracked the best in segment torsion stiffness and bending stiffness. This is quite an achievement considering the kind of weight saving and the light frame they have managed to achieve. But this is body on frame. So when the frame is doing all this bending and twisting, the body cannot be aloof. It also has to participate because it is securely attached to the frame. What I want you to notice is that the frame is just a rigid skeleton, but the body has a lot of openings, and openings are the biggest enemy of torsion. Fun experiment. Plastic bottle, completely covered, no openings. Try to give it a little twist, a bit of torsion. Nothing happens. The ring structure, the fully complete structure, gives it strength. Now let's create an opening and try to torsion it again. Oops, torsion, greatest enemy of openings. Imagine this box to be the car body and let's try the same punishment. As long as there are no openings, it is putting up a good fight against torsion. Now let's create an opening on the roof and try again. Oops, torsion wins again. Large openings like doors are strengthened locally by the A, B, and C pillars anyway, so it's fine. But the next time we go asking for a large panoramic sunroof, we must also be okay with the weird roof shapes needed to reinforce this gaping hole on an otherwise thin sheet roof. Let me finish this section with a disclaimer. This experiment was exaggerated to demonstrate the physics of torsion. In reality, you would need 4,400 Newton meters of torque to twist the frame even by 1 degree, which is too huge to experience in real life conditions. So your sunroofs are safe. But even micron level bending and torsion can cause alignment issues and therefore require reinforcement around the openings. Sunroofs will require weird roof design compromises to accommodate space for the glass to recess and for structural reinforcements. This section was just intended to drive that truth across. So continue to enjoy the sunroofs and the rest of the video. In our previous roxx video, several comments inquired about the height to width ratio of SUVs and what effect they have on dynamics. Well, the height and width at extremes are just external dimensions, and their effect is limited to internal volume and aerodynamics. For vehicle stability, what's more important is how the weight has been distributed across the vehicle and how low they have managed to get the center of gravity down. An indicator of this with respect to the wheel track is the static stability factor. For Scorpio-N, they have managed to get the center of gravity at an impressive 706 mm. For perspective, the full wheel height from ground to the top of the tire for the Scorpio-N is 763 mm, which means the center of gravity is below the wheel height also, which is impressive because if you remember, the frame was lighter than the body, which is actually on top to begin with. So the CG naturally shifts up, but they have managed to consciously redistribute all the other weights to lower the CG. So what this would do is help in high speed turns and dynamics improves because the roll force which tries to topple the car at turns passes through the center of gravity. Higher away from the ground this point of action of this force is, the more dangerous for the car. So the intention is to keep it as low as possible, which will aid in dynamics. This was along the roll axis, that is the sideways toppling. In profile, you can see that the car pitches about an axis connecting the front and rear suspensions. The higher the center of gravity is from this axis, more is the pitching arm and more pronounced the pitching. Think of fast bowlers having very long arms and you'll understand why. For example, if the roll arm height is too high above this axis, you would experience probably violent nosedives on hard braking. Mahindra have managed to suppress it to 463 mm by smartly lifting the height of the suspension to complement the low CG. All this causes the Scorpio-N to be a delight for high-speed cruising on highways, and it shows when we drive the car at speeds and turns. We have to talk about NVH and the absolute noise insulation they have managed in this cabin. Noise causes fatigue to the driver, and noise suppression at an engineering level is very expensive per decibel reduction. I mean, you have to spend a lot to reduce noise by even 1 decibel. In my opinion, the Scorpio N's cabin is super quiet for the segment standards. Definitely better than even the Fortuner. And it is so calming to drive on highways. Here's the actual audio with the mic at my ear level. In 1989, Lexus made a TV ad to prove how controlled and suppressed the vibration on their car was by balancing a pyramid of champagne glasses on the bonnet while the car was doing high speeds on roller chocks. This achieved some serious marketing and visual impact. But of late, people have taken this too seriously, and the water glass test is being shown to viral viewership as some sort of scientific test of vibration and hence ride quality. Don't get me wrong, there is some level of superficial truth in this experiment. A glass of water does indicate the local vibration at the point where it's placed, say on top of a dashboard or on the bonnet. And for some entertainment value, you could keep the same glass on the bonnet of another car and see if it spills more and feel good about it. But what would you do with this information? Okay, congratulations, you managed to crank the engine to start without spilling water on your dashboard. But does that automatically guarantee blissful ride quality? Please remember that the end customer of ride quality is the person on the seat, not a glass on the dashboard or on the bonnet. Recall that the center of gravity that we spoke about, well, the local response or acceleration at that point as it responds to the road conditions is the primary response of the vehicle. At every other point, it is called a derived response and will differ from one point to another depending on how close to the CG it is and other local conditions. The critical piece of the ride quality puzzle, which no one talks about, is actually the seat design. Consider the seat as the last spring in the suspension chain. Seat design has the ability to attenuate or suppress vibration on the floor below it and not transmit it to the guy on the seat. On the flip side, a badly designed seat will amplify the vibration and transmit it to the person on it and kill the ride on an otherwise well engineered car. This efficiency of the seat in suppressing or amplifying vibration is given by a factor called SEAT. And there are target parameters within which the ride is declared as comfortable or otherwise. Even few car makers do not pay attention to the seat design as they fit seats from what's available off the shelf or from an older model. Good seat design can save car makers a lot of money and give us car buyers a comfortable ride. The Tata Hexa and the Toyota Innova, though body on frame vehicles, have that plush ride thanks to good seat design complementing the wheelbase, suspension, and frame engineering. Even though this was out of scope of our video, I wanted to highlight this truth because this glass water gimmick is half science and it is more dangerous than even no science at all. So, next time you see someone in a vehicle with a glass of water, drink it but with a pinch of salt. Remember, the water glass is a demonstration of free surface effect more than vibration itself. So, I could easily achieve different results by just changing the glass and hence the surface area to exponential effect. Try it out yourself. As I always say, the truth is under the hood. Let us take a look under the hood of the Scorpio-N. Really? No gas strut for such a heavy bonnet, Mahindra? On next to my favorite diesel engine in India, the 2.2 M-Hawk. This is truly an engine India can be proud of. Really a world-class diesel. And I love how Mahindra tunes it to versatile applications on different vehicles. And the way it has matured over the years is really commendable. Notice the huge gap ahead of the engine and recall the crash-worthy discussion we had before. This space is left free to allow for the crushing into the car and absorbing the crash impact. Now let's go ahead and see how the power delivery looks. First, let's see the diesel mated to the 6-speed manual transmission, which is tuned like this. The power peaks at 175 PS at 3500 RPM. A wide flat torque curve making a peak of 370 Newton meters right from 1500 revs all the way to 3000 revs. Notice that within the flat torque band, power will be nice and linear. This is what gives the Scorpio-N its nice drivability across the rev range. Power will ooze out smoothly without any sudden jerks or dips within this flat torque band. But when the same engine is mated to the 6-speed automatic gearbox, they tune it to make a higher torque of 400 Newton meter, but for a narrower torque band of 1750 to 2750 revs. The peak power remains the same at 175 PS. This higher torque output is not because automatic variants cost more and hence the customers should get more bragging rights. It is rather a mechanical requirement. Since this is a torque converter, the torque has to be more compared to the manual equivalent to compensate for some torque slippage which will happen in autoboxes. The gearing of autobox will also give it a lesser final drive ratio. Torque converter boxes will also spread out the torque because they will have a larger contact area between the gears. I'll explain this clearly when we talk about gearboxes in just a while. Next, let's see the M Stallion petrol engine. This engine is finding new favor now because of the villainization of diesels and the weird NCR scrappage policy. The DPF AdBlue complication of BS 6.2 diesels also tilts the balance in favor of petrol engines. Look at this torque curve, so aggressive and so steep, climbing to the peak torque of 380 Newton meters at 1750 to 3000 RPM. I must admit, oh god, I never thought I'll see this day a petrol motor putting out more torque than the 2.2 diesel. What's even more interesting is that even between 1000 to 1500 RPM, you get about 80 to 90% of the peak torque. That is what gives you that pickup, that shooting off the line, wide grin on your face. And the power shoots off charts at 203 PS at the peak end, while being nice and linear within the flat torque band. But when we romance such an aggressive petrol monster, please do forget about the mileage. That goes out of the window. All these numbers do look good on the brochure for paper tigers, because this is what the engine makes. This torque has to then flow through the entire drivetrain before it hits the wheels on the road finally. To study the drivetrain, let's remove and throw out everything else and just concentrate on the drivetrain. The engine supplies torque which flows into the gearbox multiplies the torque depending on the particular gear you have selected and sends it into the transfer case. Since Scorpio-N is 4-wheel drive, it will have a transfer case. The transfer case sends the torque to rear differential on the rear axle normally in 2-wheel drive. And if 4-wheel drive is engaged, it clutches in the front drive shaft also and splits the torque equally to the rear axle and the front axle. I want you to notice how steep the angles are for the drive shaft coming out of the transfer case to enter the differentials. This arrangement and this angle will completely dictate the floor height of the vehicle, and now you would understand why ladder frame 4-wheel drive have such high floors which you need to climb into. Once the floor is of that height, the roof has to be raised proportionally for cabin volume. Then the overall height increases and the dynamics suffers. This is the beauty of design. The simplest choice of that drive shaft angle can totally affect the entire car dynamics. It is always a give and take, and this is what we need to understand. Well, now what does the differential do? Well, let me break it open and show you. Here's the engine, the gearbox, transfer case, rear drive shaft, front drive shaft. If we zoom into the rear diff and break it open, you will see that there is a gearing arrangement with the left and right wheel shafts not connecting to each other. There is a gap. The differential allows the wheels to spin at different speeds, and hence it's called a differential. So that when you turn, the inside wheel can slow down and the outside wheel can go faster to complete the turn automatically. Else you will be stuck in a straight line like a train on tracks. While you're off-road, this open differential action needs to be arrested sometimes, which we will see later when we come to the off-road section. With that basics done, let's compare the drivetrains of 3 4-wheel drive vehicles, Scorpio-N, Thar ROXX and the Gurkha. We are using the Gurkha here because it's very easy to compare more modern vehicles with the simplest mechanicals of the Gurkha, which will act as a very good baseline. The prime movers are identical in the Scorpio-N and the ROXX. Both use the 2.2 Mhawk 4D22 for the diesel and the 4G20 M Stallion for the petrol engine, with different states of tune for different variants. The Gurkha uses the Mercedes-derived upgraded FM 2.6 common rail. The next part of the drivetrain is the gearbox. The Mahindras use the 6R320M manual 6-speed transmission and the Aisin 6-speed automatic. The automatic is a simple but reliable torque converter. Fun fact about the ASIN automatic gearbox: ASIN is actually owned by Toyota, and the same gearbox under model name AC60F is used by Toyota on the Innova and the Fortuner and the Hilux, and even on the LC Prado and the Tacoma. The Scorpio-N has been advertised to have the shift-by-wire technology. This is just an alternative to the traditional method of direct mechanically linkage between the shifter and the transmission. The shifter sends an electronic signal to the transmission and hence called by-the-wire. It's a more modern approach and gives some flexibility to the car maker. Its a real advantage is that it is required for that kind of autonomous technology to be integrated into the car. But it is not as new as it is being advertised, because if you remember, it was also present in the more humble Scorpio Classic. Let's now compare the manual gearboxes first. Here's the gearing ratios of both the boxes. Let's calculate the ratio of the highest to the lowest gears. This is called the gear spread ratio. Mahindra crams its 6 forward and 1 reverse gear into a narrow 5.53 bandwidth, while Gurkha relaxedly spreads its 5 forward and 1 reverse along a wide 6.53 bandwidth. Within their respective bands, the tall, wide lower gears of the Gurkha help it in low-end pulling, while the Scorpio-N's higher, smaller overdrive gears help it to be a strong, high-speed cruiser. The Gurkha can chug along all day in second or third gear with the torquey grunt, while the Scorpio can quickly upshift and do some spirited high-speed driving. From the gearbox, the torque flows into the transfer case, which has one more set of gears inside it. If you are in normal two-wheel drive mode, which is for everyday driving, say in first gear, then the engine torque gets multiplied by that gearing ratio, which is 3.96 times, and the transfer case doesn't get involved now because you're still in two-wheel drive. So the torque flows only to the rear axle directly, gets multiplied again by the rear differential by 4.3 times, and it is split and given to both the rear wheels equally. Now, through this drivetrain, at every stage, the torque supplied by the engine has been multiplied by a total of 17.03 times when it hits the rear wheels. So the engine puts out, say, 370 Newton meters, but the rear wheel gets 6,300 Newton meters because of this final drive ratio. Normally, if both wheels are on the ground and having traction, then the rear differential will split this torque equally as 3150 Newton meter per wheel to each wheel. Now, from two-wheel drive, let's shift the vehicle into four-wheel drive high range or 4 high. The engine puts out 370 Newton meters like before, which goes into the gearbox. You have selected first gear, so torque multiplies again by 3.96 times. And now when it hits the transfer case will get involved because we are in four-wheel drive mode. Transfer case will see that you are in four-wheel drive high, so it will put its high gear, that is 1:1 multiple, basically no multiplication of torque, but it does one important job. It clutches in the front prop shaft also into the drivetrain. Now the transfer case splits the torque equally and sends it to the front and rear differential for further multiplication and splitting between the two wheels on the respective axles by those differentials. If all four wheels are on the ground and have traction, then all of them share the same total torque equally. In this case, it would be 1575 Newton meters per wheel on all four wheels. Next, let's slot the vehicle into four-wheel drive low range, which is the beast mode of the vehicle. Again, the engine puts out torque, the gearbox multiplies it, sends it to the transfer case, but this time the transfer case engages its low range gear, which means it multiplies the torque 2.48 times and then splits it to the front and rear prop shafts on to the front and rear differentials, which will again further multiply and distribute to both wheels on respective axles. Now notice that this final drive ratio this time is the maximum possible ratio where the torque hitting the wheels will be maximum. This is very useful for slow speed crawling in off-road conditions, and hence this final drive ratio is called the crawl ratio. For Scorpio-N, it comes out to be 42.23. Compare this to the crawl ratio of the Gurkha. By a similar calculation, you will turn out that it puts out a healthy higher 45.43 crawl ratio. So even though At the engine, the Gurkha puts out lesser torque. At the wheel, it covers the gap by the better crawl ratio. So at total torque, the Gurkha makes it available for all the wheels is 14,991 Newton meters, while the Scorpio-N puts out a total of 15,625 Newton meters for the wheels to Next, let's compare the Scorpio-N manual and the automatic box. You will instantly notice the wider 6.21 gear spread ratio for the automatic box. This is a torque converter, so it's not a quick shifter like a DSG or a DCT gearbox, but it does smartly keep the pot boiling by playing with this gear spread available to it. If we similarly compare the crawl ratio of the manual and the automatic, the manual would end up having 42.23, but the auto will get only 38.39. So the manual transmission, whose engine tune puts out 370 Newton meters from the engine at the crank end, but when it comes to the wheel, it will give 15,625 Newton meters. But the auto box, in contrast, the engine which is mated to the automatic transmission, should compensate by starting off at the engine with a higher output so that it can try to close this torque gap at the wheel. So that ends up being 15,356 Newton meters. This is why on paper auto boxes have higher peak torque, as we explained before. Now, if this truth is not known, it's easy to assume that automatic variants of the Scorpio-N are more powerful and more torquey compared to the manual, but we just busted that myth. Of course, how it will actually perform on the road will depend on how good a manual driver you are and whether you can keep up with the shift pattern of an equivalent auto box. But this is a simplified explanation of the facts for you to make sense of the mechanics. Let's go on and discuss about the differential locks. Until now, after the torque exits the transfer case, I've been saying that if all is well and normal and if all wheels have traction, then the differential will multiply and split the torque equally between both the wheels on its own axle. But what if one wheel has no traction and the other wheel has some traction? Example, one wheel is in the air and the other is on the ground. Then remember this thumb rule. The differential is a lazy pumpkin. When it is open, that is, it is in normal conditions, it always sends torque preferentially to the wheel offering least resistance. Just remember this. So in this particular condition, the wheel in the air will offer resistance because it's in air. It will get all the torque supplied by the differential and it will spin away freely. While the wheel on the ground, who actually needs that torque to move the vehicle ahead, gets nothing and stays hungry. This open action has to be locked in off-road conditions so that both the wheels are forced to move at the same speed and hence offer equal resistance, and hence the differential will be forced to share the torque equally. This locking the differential is done differently in all these three vehicles, and let's see how different it is in each case. The Gurkha uses manual mechanical locking differentials on both axles. This locking action is proactive, meaning the driver has to intentionally engage mechanical levers and lock the differential intentionally before he is going into the obstacle, or if he is stuck in some kind of situation, he has to engage this intentionally on his own and then try to get the vehicle out. In the roxx, it is fully electronic. When the vehicle detects the slip, the onboard computer sends a signal to the electronic differential lock to lock itself and achieve the same effect electronically. It is a reactive system, means the vehicle does it automatically without driver intervention when required. In the Scorpio-N, there is a mechanically locking differential, but it is also locked automatically by the vehicle reactively. Again, the driver has no choice and no intervention is required from him. Additionally, the Mahindras also have what is called the BLD, brake locking differential. What this does is to fool that lazy differential pumpkin I told you about by braking one wheel intermittently. The wheel which is in air, it will brake it so that that wheel offers more resistance and the wheel on the ground offers relatively lesser resistance, and our lazy pumpkin will gladly redirect torque to the wheel on the ground and the wheel gets traction and moves the vehicle out. This is also automatic, means the vehicle will do it on its own without driver input. This, as we can see, is a shortcut to achieve the same diff lock effect, but by using brakes intermittently. Here I have presented the technical facts as they are about all these three vehicles. Which of these suits your style of four-wheel driving? Letting the vehicle do the intervention for you, or you having the control and having to do it yourself? That is your choice. I should mention that unfortunately for Scorpio-N sold in India, the MLD, the mechanically locking differential, has been quietly removed at the turn of this year by Mahindra, leaving only the BLD kit intact. This is a major downgrade for an otherwise capable off-road SUV. If you're getting a Scorpio-N, try to get the manual Eaton lockers retrofitted aftermarket if you're planning to exploit the great off-road capability of the Scorpio-N. Mechanical advantages go only so far. Finally, weight savings done do translate into better performance on road. Here's a comparison of curb weights of all these vehicles. Now, many of you in the comments have been asking me if there's a difference in 4 Explore and 4-wheel drive. What we just now saw is 4-wheel drive. The mechanical ability to send torque to all 4 wheels is called 4-wheel drive. Simply, we've already explained how it works. 4 Explore is Mahindra's brand name for the system or the complete suite of these aspects put together and integrated into one smart system. This kind of electronic suite can be traced back to probably the Land Rover's terrain management system. Each company calls it by a different brand name. Toyota calls it, for example, Sigma 4 on the Fortuner. Some others call it terrain response system. Suzuki calls it the All Grip, etc. These are just brand names. What does 4 Explore actually do? It's an onboard computer which will sense throttle position, vehicle speed, and steering angle, and it will instantly redistribute torque on its own to whichever wheel needs it, depending on the case and the terrain, to get traction and help you get out of the mess. In the Scorpio-N, it has 4 driver selectable modes which can operate along with the dial which controls the 4-wheel drive system. Depending on the combination you have chosen, the computer will step in and moderate the 4-wheel drive system, engine response, transmission shift pattern, and the traction control system and the electronic stability program. I'll explain one by one. If, for example, you select that grass, gravel, snow mode, the computer will automatically put the vehicle into 4-wheel drive, high range. The car will launch in second gear and skip first gear automatically. So the gears will also early upshift and downshift later than usual, because the surface below you, the terrain is loose and you want that kind of traction in this case. The next is mud and rut mode. What do you need here when you are crossing mud and rut? You need good torque and traction. So the computer will cause now the gearbox to hold on to the gears longer. So you will get later upshifts and earlier downshifts. Imagine our engine torque curves which we explained previously, and you will understand why this is happening. It wants it to be in the lower, larger, torquey pulling gears more time. So that's why it is doing it. Then is the sand mode. Here there is a loose sand underneath your wheels, so it is easy to get sunk in. So momentum is key. We also have a dedicated video on off-road sand driving, so check that out. I'll link it in the description. The computer, when it detects that you're on sand, that is, you have put it in sand mode, the computer will late upshift and early downshift to keep the torquey gears engaged and keep biting and keep pulling you along so that you don't come to a stop. So you have enough momentum to carry through the sand. I hope now it is clear. The 4 Explore computer uses all the electronic suites available to it and mechanicals also, like the TCS, ESP, BLD, MLD, and 4-wheel drive, which all we explained individually till now. It uses this in combination as and when required to help the driver automatically. In contrast to the 4 Explore, in a simple 4-wheel drive only vehicle like the Gurkha, the driver has to consciously do all this play by himself by quickly, say, shifting the gears up and down and controlling the accelerator pedal for the throttle input and engage differential locks when required. The vehicle will not do anything on its own for you. The control and responsibility is completely with the driver in a simple vehicle like the Gurkha, which can be both advantageous or disadvantageous depending on what level of skill of a driver you are. On a side note, do not confuse any of this with the zip zap zoom gimmick. That is entirely different because that controls the sensitivity of the accelerator, gear shifting point, and the steering effort by controlling TCS to give you different driving feel. For example, zoom is the fun mode, right? So the accelerator will become very, very responsive. and even a slight tap on the accelerator and the car will fly off. The steering will get heavier because your car is flying and you need better control, so hearing will weigh down itself. The gear shift will also get delayed. You'll of course lose fuel efficiency and mileage if you put it in the zoom mode. So that is a different thing. The 4Explore controls the complete terrain management, that is the off-road driving part of the vehicle. Next, I want to talk about the truth behind two news articles that grabbed headlines. The first is the Scorpio-N getting a perfect 5-star G NCAP global NCAP rating. Actually, it got a 5-star only for adult. For child, it got only 3-star. Anyway, but its 5-star G NCAP was shockingly offset by its 0-star in Australian NCAP. Now, my commentary on it is like this. There are many NCAP, that is new car assessment programs around the world. There is a G NCAP, which is the global NCAP headquartered at London. There is an Australia NCAP, there is a Latin NCAP, Asian NCAP, etc. All these, we must understand, are not government bodies or some regulatory authority. They are not-for-profit NGO kind of organizations which test cars voluntarily against rules that they have prescribed and published themselves and give out the results. Only American NCAP, which is the original NCAP, and Bharat NCAP, our own Indian NCAP, are actually government agencies operating under the respective road transport ministries. Now, these global NCAPs do not give points only for structural stability or the actual crashworthiness. Some may penalize even for lack of certain safety features, as they have declared. That's what happened in Australia. The Australian NCAP says that if there is no automatic emergency braking or ADAS, then it is straight away 0-star. The Scorpio at the time of testing at Australia didn't have these features, and so it got a 0-star. How it performs in the physical crash test notwithstanding, it will still get a 0-star if it doesn't have autonomous features, according to Australian NCAP. Despite these subjective rules that each of these NCAP have, I must put it on record that they have managed to get the manufacturers to concentrate on safety, especially in India in recent times. In that sense, they do a lot of service to the car buying population, but they also have their own vested interests. Let's not get into that. What I want you to do is the next time you see any NCAP result, read the freely available online full report to see why that particular car got that particular rating and how important is that aspect to you. Read it yourself and don't believe the social media buzz around a perfect 5-star or a 0-star. The next news is the Scorpio-N apparently breaking the world record for the fastest production car across the Simpson Desert. Now, Simpson Desert is a tough course to run with several sand dunes and different conditions, and it does present a good challenge to a stock vehicle. And kudos to Scorpio-N for doing this. But the truth behind this is that this world record is an inaugural record, meaning Scorpio-N is the first production car to do a timed run across the Simpson and set the record. If anyone will break it in the future or has any other car been faster in the same circuit, there is no saying, because this is the start point. This is the baseline that the Scorpio-N has set as a world record. It is still a world record, but there is no other comparison. So now you choose how you want to perceive this record, and I have simply presented the facts behind the news. Now let's compare all of these four vehicles on purely their off-road geometry. Approach and departure and ramp over angles along with good ground clearance will definitely give you peace of mind while off-roading and can help you take on more technical obstacles. You can pause the video and compare the specs, but what I want you to focus on is the water wading depth. Scorpio-N has a 500 mm rated water wading depth, and that's about 250 mm below the top of its tire. Gurkha has the class leading 700 mm water wading depth, which is just 80 mm short of submerging its full tire. Now, in many comments, I've been asked why is it only 700 mm for the Gurkha despite the snorkel. Let me bust this myth about the snorkel. The snorkel doesn't guarantee unlimited water wading depth till your roof submerges. The snorkel is an air intake into the engine, yes. Its function is to primarily give clean air and cool air, both of which are not available closer to the ground where the original air dam usually is, where the engine breathes from otherwise. This is the case especially in trails and off-road conditions when there's a lot of heat and dust kicked up in front of the car, especially if you're moving in a convoy. Why do we then call it a snorkel? Well, let's say theoretically, in a purely mechanical car, if the car goes into water, as long as the engine is breathing through the snorkel, it will not stall. The exhaust tailpipe, if the engine is diesel, will still have enough back pressure to keep the water out from there as well. So, in that case, the snorkel does help in water wading, and you will get across the stream or river as long as you maintain some momentum. But the wading depth is determined by not only the level of this air intake, but the lowest point on the car where other air breathing components like transfer case breathers, etc., are located. There may be some critical electronics even lower than these breathers, and if those electronics get submerged, especially in modern cars, the car could come to a complete stall in the middle of the water crossing. That's why the manufacturers quote these numbers to let you know the lowest critical component up to which the car can wade safely. If you are buying a 4x4 and wish to wade through water, then you must know where your breathers come out of and where these components are located so you can make an estimate about what you're getting into. And remember to always walk the track before driving your car through. Avoid water crossings as far as possible because if you're not careful, it can cause long lasting harm to the vehicle. Remember the thumb rule of off road driving: if you can't walk it, you surely can't wheel it. Of course, our great cities provide forced water wading opportunities where sometimes you have no option but to cross, but they do give these small markings on the wall to help you gauge the wading depth. Tread safely. I'm very sorry to this lady. I'll go slow and steady, and we are out. Be safe with water. It looks fun and cool in pictures but can bust your vehicle for good. Bottom line, snorkel is not for water wading and doesn't give infinite wading capacity. Even without the snorkel, if these things are taken care by good intentional design, then you can actually increase the wading depth even further. For example, the Fortuner and Pajero Sport in Australia match the Gurkha's wading depth at 700 mm. The Isuzu MUX and Ford Everest can wade 800 mm, while the Defender 110 does 900 mm. And none of these vehicles have a snorkel. That proves the point. Another important spec that I don't find mentioned in other reviews is the towing capacity. Since the company wants to pit the Scorpio-N against 7-seat family 4-wheel drive SUVs internationally, I must point out that the Scorpio falls short with its 2500 kg towing capacity, while the segment standard is minimum 3000 kgs or more. This is an important factor for markets such as Australia, where cross-country towing is quite normal. Next, I want to show you a small but critical design element. Near the fog light, near this Scorpion Sting, is the small gap on both sides. This small slit has a grand role to play in the aerodynamics of the vehicle. I'm highlighting this because some owners are covering this slit up with blanks or aftermarket fog lights. Fun fact about your Tripaccino: I happen to have a PhD in aerodynamics, and when you cover the slit, what you're doing is practically driving a dagger through my heart. Let me explain. When the vehicle moves ahead, it has to fight two types of friction. One is from the road, which is rolling friction handled by the tires, and the other is air drag. The air hits the nose of the car, splits to the side, and flows along this door line, which is otherwise flush side profile, which is disturbed by the spinning wheel. This will disturb the flow of the air and cause something called eddies, which will increase the drag and decrease mileage and even increase the tire noise, especially in open spoke wheels such as this. This slit creates an air curtain by pushing the air through it and creates a curtain inside which the wheel can spin freely without disturbing the flow. If you have been into those car showrooms with large glass doors, then some showrooms have this air curtain blowing air at you so that the air conditioning is kept in. This is a very similar application. And so do not cover this up, no matter how pretty an aftermarket fog light you get for this. If, on the other hand, you plan on changing the entire bumper for off-road application, then that's a different story, for which you have to check out my off-road bumper video to understand the legality and the airbag issues with such bumpers. I'll link that video in the description. A word of comparison between the Scorpio-N and the roxx tires. Roxx rides on bigger wheels, but both have the same amount of rubber on that 6-inch sidewall. But I feel the roxx will ride better if it swaps to 18 inches of the Scorpio-N. If you're getting the Scorpio-N, please stick to the 18 inches and do not upsize just for looks. Check out my tire upsize video for the speedo and the odo errors that creep in, and if you upsize too much, what all can go wrong with it. Next, Let's take a look under the body to explore some engineering highlights of the Scorpio-N. Starting from front, we see that they've gone for a tall steering knuckle, 541 tall. This helps the wheel articulation improve and also the wheel travel to go more linear trajectory up and down. We already explained how this helps improve the pitching motion and the brake dive also. Mainly, they have also reduced the unsprung mass by 35%, which will immensely help improve the ride. The Scorpio-N uses a DPEPS, a dual pinion electric power steering. So, compared to a traditional system, here there are two pinions involved. So, your steering input is instantly conveyed to the first pinion, which then communicates it to electrical motors located closer to the steering knuckle, which will turn it very responsively. The side effect or an advantage of this is that you will get very good weight savings compared to a traditional hydraulic arrangement. But its main advantage, like several other electronic in the car, as we have described before, is for integrating autonomous technology like ADAS, lane keep assist, etc. For this, it's a mandatory requirement for the electrical motors to do the work so that the computer can communicate and control the lane keep functions. As we move back further along the underbody, we reach the rear suspension. Mahindra has chosen the multi-link suspension along with the Watts link. This is more expensive than, say, a traditional panhard rod, but what is the function of this? You see, the frame and the body are sprung up on the suspension, while the axle and the wheels are unsprung. They are not supported by the spring and are the ones actually in contact with the road. The Watts link's main aim is to maintain the center line of the axle aligned with the center line of the frame, so that however the wheels turn, the chassis should follow the axle center line and not lag or sway from side to side. Suppose if this link was not there, then the wheel and the axle would execute the turn, but the chassis will continue straight because of inertia, and this causes the side sway, which will throw the passenger towards the outside of the turn on a sharp turn. The Watts link does a phenomenal job of this by making the chassis and the axle go purely up and down, arresting any side to side sway movement as much as possible. This gives good ride quality and helps us carry more speed with confidence on turns. This is very well executed. One concern I have with the underbody of the Scorpio-N, especially in the diesel variant, is how exposed the AdBlue tank is. This is bang in the departure zone and can take hit off-road very easily. I would recommend getting an armor plating for it like this one. Of course, in the petrol variant, there's no AdBlue tank, so there's no problem. Generally, if you plan for off-roading, then I would recommend a good full underbody armor. We have a dedicated video on the advantages and disadvantages of that in the channel. I will link it in the description below. Several reviews have covered interior aspects very extensively. So I'll highlight only what are the deeper insights. I find the color scheme of the Scorpio-N very practical and the material very durable. It's got decent legroom even in the second row as well. But what's impressive is how supportive the seats are, and they're well designed and comfortable. But the real insight is the wide cabin. I want you to remember that width is the costliest dimension in design. This Scorpio-N is 3% wider than the segment best, but 3% wider is much more expensive to achieve than 3% longer because it's disproportionately advantageous in terms of the resultant cabin volume and space. As we talk about the boot and the third row, it's a fair attempt, but I feel this implementation could have been much better. It's neither the best used as a third row seat, nor does it liberate maximum boot space when folded. This could have been done better. Next, let's get to the proof of the pudding, that is the driving. For this review, I got to live with three cars spread over a period of a month. I have driven the top variant diesel auto four-wheel drive and a manual diesel of a lower tune and the petrol manual also. I have spent considerable time with each of these variants across three different cities to understand their driving feel, and this review will reflect my opinions of that varied experience. The first thing that you notice about the diesel M-Hawk is how eager the engine is to please the driver. Mahindra's engine DNA is this very explosive surge of torque that hits you. Maruti or even Tata, etc., when they tune their engine and the fueling calibration, they will try to juice out mileage with performance taking a second seat, if at all. Mahindra's engine, you can drive it blindfolded and say it's a Mahindra because of this punchy character that it puts out. Put your foot down and it'll just fly to hell with mileage. Yes, it's a 2-ton block of steel screaming down the road, not your visual of an enthusiastic sports car, but for a big burly off-road SUV, this is the closest you'll get to a driver's car. The M-Hawk simply converts diesel into a sheepish grin on the driver's face. All the rest are just mere details. Off the line, the Scorpio-N is quick to get going and climbs up without much drama. For its size, I must say the steering is beautifully light and it's very easy to maneuver in tight city traffic also. The DPEPS setup shows its advantage here. The seats are generous in design and it's another big factor that adds to the blissful driving overall experience. The strong low end and punchy mid range makes the Scorpio-N a very strong puller across the rev range. And that flat torque curve which we saw earlier makes it pull cleanly as you increase speed. Out on the highway, the Scorpio-N spreads its long running legs and it really comes alive on the highway. Its sorted dynamics give you confidence to carry much more speed than I would have imagined, and even in turns, it is so composed. Ride quality is way better than any Scorpio I've driven till date, and it improved significantly when I had added more passengers and all the seats were occupied. The petrol M Stallion is extremely refined. It is a real pleasure to drive and it's very smooth yet torquey. And the technical reason behind this we already explained in the video earlier. This is a typical Mahindra's diesel DNA which has seeped into the petrol avatar also. Mileage will definitely be low, but what a smooth drive, guys. Between the two, the diesel motor has that torque punch, but I'm more impressed with what they have managed to pull out of this petrol motor. With DPF and AdBlue complexities which will plague large diesels, the petrol option seems more lucrative for fuss-free ownership, especially if you're not going for four-wheel drive and can live with that low fuel economy. But that would be a sin, a very big mistake, because the four-wheel drive capability of the Scorpio is really superior, considering that it is otherwise a family touring SUV. I did take the top model diesel four-wheel drive off-road and was very impressed with the off-road capabilities of the Scorpio-N. The 4Explore system, the computer works really well, and the vehicle I drove was the older model and had the MLD still intact, so it was great. It was actually a breeze compared to the more involved driving I usually do with my Gurkha. And while I personally prefer that simplicity of the purely mechanical Gurkha, the 4Explore system democratizes off-roading for even newer drivers, and it makes off-roading more accessible to a wider audience. It makes off-roading fun and easy to do for everyone. I will put out a dedicated off-road video of that experience off-roading with the Scorpio, but I'll see if I can repeat the terrain with other four-wheel drives as well to give you a proper showdown between all the four-wheel drives which I can muster. But you will have to wait some more time for that. Thanks for your understanding. My only complaint is that with so much electronics, reliability really becomes an issue. During my time with the Scorpio-N, I had several instances where the four-wheel drive malfunction failure warning came on and the car refused to slot into four-wheel drive. Some other electronic glitches in the in-car entertainment screen also left a very bad aftertaste of a otherwise pleasant driving experience. All these small things remind you that Mahindra's Scorpio-N is still not up there with the D-segment SUVs. That's where the Fortuner really shines because it doesn't ever give up on you like this. There's another peculiar observation I had with highway driving, especially with the Scorpio-N diesel. I have not seen anyone else mention it or talk about it, so comment and let me know if you have observed it too. It's not a big glaring thing, it's even easy to miss if you're not consciously invested in the car's response. It is something called a driveline shunt. When you are speeding on the highway, suppose you suddenly reduce speed, get off the accelerator for some reason, probably a vehicle came ahead or slowed in front of you or something, And then after some time, you again push down the accelerator aggressively to regain speed. When you do this, then I feel that the drivetrain gives a small shunt or a jolt or a lag as if it is taking time to pick up that slack. It's a very minor version of what you feel when you are in a train and the engine suddenly starts and moves ahead. But the first compartment will be jolted ahead because of the link between the compartments is picking up that slack. That's called a shunt. And I felt it in few other vehicles also before as well. But here in Scorpio-N, I feel it's a little pronounced. It is not a deal breaker, it is not a big thing, but you will find it a little annoying because the rear diff lets go of that slack and it picks it up if you get off and get on the throttle successively, aggressively. Now, I'll explain why this happens, but it will get a bit technical though. You have to put up with me. So, if you're up for it, please stay, or if you find it boring, you can please skip ahead about a minute and continue with the review. So remember I had told you how torque gets multiplied by the drivetrain each time it goes through the gear system. This is actually physically achieved by the ratio of the diameters of the gears, right? Simple physics. So if one gear is say 1 centimeter dia and the other is 4 centimeter dia, the small gear has to rotate 4 times to complete one rotation of the big gear. Yeah, this is easily visualizable. So when we say that we have a crawl ratio of say 1 is to 45, that means the engine shaft will rotate 45 times to make the wheel drive shaft rotate only once. That is how the wheel gets all that torque, 45 times the engine makes to do one rotation. This is good for low speed pulling, torque, off road conditions. Now, in overdrive gears, that is the fifth and sixth gear, you will notice that they have decimal ratios like 0.7, etc. Meaning the engine will rotate 7 times, but the wheel shaft will rotate more, 10 times for every 7 rotations of the engine. That is what makes it good for high speed freewheeling and cruising on the highways. Now, in between all this, remember that there is a big bad rear differential sitting, which has a multiple of more than 4 times. It is sitting always and there is no change in that, and it is participating in every time in the drivetrain. This is a sudden large multiplication in this torque chain. It is required in the Scorpio-N and Gurkha etc. for the heavy rear and maintaining a good final drive ratio for the pull required. Now at speeds, once you get off the gas, this differential will ease out. But suddenly, if you spool it back in, this big boy will take some time to pick up the slack and clutch back in. That is the classic driveline shunt you'll experience. Did I make sense? Please comment and let me know and give me feedback if I should be too technical like this, or is it good to discuss these things at all. Again, do not confuse this with turbo lag. That delay in the kick of the turbo is because the turbo spool depends on the engine to put out hot exhaust gases, and then it will reclaim some of that exhaust gases to make more power. So that has an inbuilt lag which we feel as a delayed turbo kick. That's different from this. The Watts link at the rear works meticulously to keep the chassis aligned to the axle, and it prevents that side to side sway that we saw in old Scorpios, which it was boat like, and I really didn't drive like the ride of any of the old Scorpios. This is by far my favorite Scorpio till date. Now, since we are talking about rear axle and Watts links and all that, I must bust one more myth that has been doing rounds on the internet. That viral video of a Thar roxx doing jumps in reverse gear. If you've not seen it, don't bother, don't search and see it and waste your time. If you want the Scorpio-N, will also do the same thing if we wanted to. See, what happens is that the rear axle is unsprung, as we explained before, right? And the Watts link makes the axle go purely up and down, and it doesn't allow side sway. That also we've explained. Now, remind yourself of the engine torque curves, which we explained a little much earlier in the video. You had 6 forward gears to absorb the torque spread. And now if I put the gear in reverse and rev the engine and lift off the clutch, the engine doesn't know that you're in reverse. It will dump all the torque surge on the transmission, which goes to the rear axle fully. There are multi-links spinning the chassis down. What all this will do is a torque surge gushing to the rear while you're limited by the one single reverse gear in this direction. So like a horse on gallop, your rear will lift up and down, and if you take a slow motion video, it will look scary and entertaining. Don't feed oxygen to such clickbaits. Now, what happens if the same is done in the forward direction? Well, even then, also the car will gallop. But here, a fat engine is sitting on the front and pinning the nose down, unlike the rear axle, which had no weight on it. And the front is not a rigid axle, it's a independent front suspension. So the effect will be suppressed. Hope that all this clears the myth. It's a normal thing. It's no fault against the roxx or the Scorpio-N. That settles it. I love how confident the Scorpio-N feels for quick lane changes, even at good speeds. Similar adventures or misadventures in other tall ladder frames that I've done in the past have put my heart in my mouth. But in the Scorpio-N, you are calm and composed. Overall, I find the Scorpio-N as an evolved, mature Mahindra. The effort at making this better at an engineering level in terms of, say, seat comfort, all round visibility, noise NVH control, and driving dynamics shows it shines through clearly when you spend time with the car. But there are certain annoying misses, like it should have had both tilt and reach steering adjustment. It would have made finding that sweet spot all the more easier. And the curtain airbags don't go all the way up to the third row in the back. That could have also been integrated. And there are some other small driver specific nitpicks which you yourself will pick up during your own test drive. But besides that, overall, it is a very, very evolved Mahindra. The Scorpio is truly the car that made Mahindra. If there was no Scorpio, there is no M-Hawk and there is no Mahindra. That's how important a milestone this vehicle is, not only for the company, but to the entire Indian auto industry itself. And it surely deserves our respect for that reason. In its latest avatar, the Scorpio-N has truly become the best version of itself, has grown in sophistication and aspiration to compete with the big boys in the D segment, both at home and international. Aspiration to compete against the Fortuner is one thing, and living up to the promise is entirely different ballgame. I find certain aspects of the Scorpio-N extremely well executed. It's got a bulletproof M-Hawk reliable engine and a smooth M-Stallion, but the power torque figures are still not taking the fight to the Fortuner. In its support, however, its tremendously improved NVH and road manners and the way it handles rough roads definitely show its intentional engineering, overtaking the Fortuner in certain aspects. It has wide, comfy seats, but internal packaging could have been done much better. While both at home and abroad, the Scorpio N keeps forcing us to look at it as a budget alternative to the Fortuner, as a great car for the price. But as a whole package, price no bar, objectively 1 to 1, it still has those nagging misses and lacks the fuss-free, bulletproof, all-round reliability that the overpriced Fortuner sells to us. It definitely has the potential to take the fight to the Fortuner's door, but today as it stands, it's fighting purely on price advantage. Now all that is if you consider its ambition to fight above its weight in the D segment, like the company wants you to. But if you actually and realistically compare it with its own peer group in the C, C plus or C2 segment, then the Scorpio N emerges as a superb choice for a robust family four-wheel drive vehicle for touring or overlanding. It has in its segment very little competition which can do what it does in the effortless way it does it. Personally, in my own consideration, I would rate the Scorpio N variant to variant more value for money than even the Thar roxx. I'm especially impressed with its off-road capability for what is otherwise a civilized family tourer. For purely on-road highway mile munching, you definitely have better options. But for offbeat touring or overlanding with family, and some weekend mudslinging if you will, as that only car in the house, the Scorpio N is my pick of the lot. With that, I have unpacked all the technical facts, fine details, and the truth under the hood of the Scorpio N, and hope you now have all that you need to make an informed decision after you take a proper test drive with your family. That is the mission of Tripaccino. Let me know which vehicle you want me to uncover the truth under the hood next. Should we find out how and why the super expensive, overpriced Fortuner is still king? Or should we expose the strengths of the humble but capable mountain goat, the Suzuki Jimny? Subscribe and stay tuned for my next video. Until then, drive safe.